Welcome to the Conscious Experience. My name is Boris Kerjner. I'm so excited to welcome you to today's episode on this channel where we explore powerful, empowering, transformational perspectives on the issues that we face every day. And today, I'm here with my brother, Mike. Mike, what are we up to today?
So we're exploring a very hot topic. Today, we're going to be exploring censorship versus freedom of speech. So this is it's been an ongoing topic for at least the last 5 years, and I think it's getting more and more. People are becoming more and more aware of things. So let's get into this right away. So, Boris, what is censorship?
Yeah, censorship. Maybe we can begin to define it this way. Censorship is when there is an editing that happens between somebody who is expressing themselves, their ideas, their ideology, and those who would be the receivers or the listeners of this message. And then in between, we have this third party which edits out certain things or modifies the message or bans the message. So I would say that censorship is essentially this filtering where somebody who is in a position of power has this sense that they are justified in adjusting and in modulating the kind of information that the population is exposed to. I kind of put it that way.
Right.
How about you?
Based on what you're saying, it is very subjective, right? Like that person in power who is deciding what is right or beneficial for the masses versus what is wrong or harmful. It's based on their own personal kind of upbringing, right? I would say.
Could be, or it could be a kind of a council, like a behind the scenes kind of council. The part that feels a little bit kind of, it's almost as if the population or people are seen more as like babies or as not as capable of making their own choice. And so there is this authority figure who then processes and decides what we're allowed or what not. And so the fact that the population doesn't necessarily get to participate clearly in this decision-making process, is probably one of those controversial sides of censorship.
Yeah, and I like what you said. It's literally like as we become adults, we still have this parent that is able to tell us what to do, what we can't do, all these things. And I can see people liking that and also many people disliking that parental figure. So
Yeah.
why do you think censorship is necessary? Like, what are some good reasons for censorship?
Yeah, so this has been a very interesting angle for me to explore because when I first encountered censorship, I kind of got this, I'm like, I can't believe this. This doesn't make any sense. Like, how could anybody stand for this? But I understood that there's also this side of censorship, which is essentially it is like, so imagine that there's somebody that has the opportunity to go with a loudspeaker, let's say like on the radio, or just gets into many people's homes, and they say something like, well, if you go to this place and you gather here, and what we're going to do is we're going to get all of these, for example, things for free, or another kind of space is like, hey, on the digital spectrum, it's like, hey, go to this website, put in $1, you're going to get $2 out, right? And then there's this idea that essentially there's somebody with a nefarious intention when they are speaking in their freedom of speech, right? And they're saying essentially untruths. And there is something to be said between, giving the freedom of speech, meaning in a way that is like the truth and untruth are equal. Now, this is a very interesting spot. And I feel like this is where this idea of righteous censorship kind of arises and says, wait a second, yeah, we could say that everybody gets to decide for themselves, but here is like a scam, let's say in process, or a manipulation of the masses in a particular way. And we will step in and say, no, this is not allowed. We can't have this because you're going to essentially, through your freedom, promote something that is deleterious to people. And I think this is the very basis and foundation where the entire COVID narrative came out with, this censorship. It's like, hey, no, we can't talk about what's not working or what's bad or why it's bad. This is a misinformation that can cause people to actually lose their lives, right? And so from this position, it kind of seems like, it's very righteous thing to do.
And I think like whether it's an individual or a corporation or a government entity, really what they're trying to do is prevent violence or harm, and preventing the spreading of false information. I say false information in quotes because that is also very subjective. But I think things like violence or harm are not as, I mean, that's still subjective when you're talking about like words, but things like obvious cases, and I know this is extreme, is like you can't upload a video of you shooting up a school, right? People have done this, or like chopping off somebody's head. Those are very like violent and harmful, and yes, those people should be censored. But it becomes a little bit less clear. The lines are a little bit less clear when it's just words.
Right.
We all grew up with that saying. It's like, what is that? Something about stones can't hurt you or something.
Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily true that words don't hurt. They certainly do, but it's the sense of responsibility, right? It's like, is it your responsibility to make sure that I don't get hurt? This is a really interesting kind of like spot. And some people would say, yeah, I mean, you can't just like, blah, 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 do whatever you want. But on the other hand, it's like, how far down that rabbit hole do we go in terms of like, what if I'm offended by the color of the shirt you're wearing, or like, and so where is that protection and that kind of like, discipline go? And I want to just contrast it back to like my schoolyard days, like back in, for example, in the Soviet Union, right? Or even just here in Canada, right? It's like, yeah, people would like, at least for sure in Russia, it would be this experience. People would give you nicknames based on like what you look like, or like some way that you messed up, and they'll be like, oh yeah, you're just like this, you're the guy who fell off the branch, branch faller. But it's like, and that would be just like, it almost seemed to me that it became more something that is, it's not an attack of character. It's just like, sometimes even my dad and his friends would call each other like these different kind of things, and it's just playful banter. But I can see, on the other hand, if we really go down that route of trauma awareness and really understanding that people actually, sometimes children get called fatty fat and collapse, right? In their ego collapses, and they develop all kinds of different problems. But the question again is like, is it that we come in by force and we try to like basically like stop this conversation from happening, or do we speak and try to do this through education and say, actually, here's why it's important, and here's why that information is wrong, because there's a way of censoring. It's not really censoring. It's by taking what is true and putting a lot of light on it, a lot of awareness, and saying, you may hear something like this, but this is what's true. And it's almost like this space of like in the forest, the trees and the plants that get the most sunlight, those thrive, right? And they grow and grow bigger. And so you don't have to go and fight and cut down all of the other ones. You can just literally, shine the light on a specific subject. That's another kind of angle that's coming.
But I think the problem with using the words like what is true is like, is the mainstream narrative true? Like what is true is very subjective. And it seems weird to think about it, like getting back to that sticks and stones analogy. It's like, we would never censor in a romantic relationship, but we don't think of like the world as our romantic partner, right? We don't think so positively of the world, but we would never like put your hand over somebody's mouth when you're having a conversation being like, no, my view is right and I don't want to hear your view. No, you would want to hear their view, right? Knowing that it's not up to the person to affect, or like with the right education, their words cannot change.
And I think this probably all comes down to like maybe the EQ of humanity, the emotional, intelligence. And it's like, we are still living in a world where primarily the mode of navigating is blame. The primary consciousness is a victim consciousness, which says, the reason I feel this way is because of you, instead of saying, oh, ow, that kind of hurt me inside. Let me take a look at like where that sting went, because you didn't do anything to me, and here I am, I'm feeling this hurt. When is the first time I remember, and we try to like essentially use this as an opportunity to release the samskara, to release the trauma. So, but there is no such awareness. There's nobody in the world. And you crash your, let's say, shopping cart into another person. They're not like, oh, let me process this. They're more like, hey, you watch where you're going, right? So I think it's important to also consider the context. Like if we're living in an enlightened society, maybe it's a completely different conversation. But based on the fact that, in my perspective, we are living in a world where it's essentially 5-year-olds in adult bodies for the most part. Even if they're 70-year-old bodies, they're walking around as this 5-year-old, completely reacting, completely fearing that they would be found guilty or shameful. And it's always boom. So if we're living in a kindergarten, then it is important for us to consider how to create the best kindergarten versus trying to appeal to like some super high ideals and say, well, you should be this way. No, it's like, how do we deal with a world that is emotionally probably at about a 5-year-old stage?
Yeah, I agree. It's so much about emotional intelligence. We have so much freedom. It's like just two basic ones is like, one, you can listen to something and you can change your perspective on it. That's one option you have. Or two, you can just turn off whatever you're watching if you don't like it. You have that freedom, you know what I mean? But people feel like, no, I have to fight it. And it's being said and it's going to somehow hurt me. And the bear is going to come attack me because of this viewpoint. It's like, not really. And then a lot of people will use the idea of, and I don't know, we're just talking mostly about America and let's say Canada. I think we follow similar rules around freedom of speech. Like, for example, the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, people are like, no, I have freedom of speech. But what they don't realize, which is why it's such a controversial thing, is that does not cover anything that has to do with violence or harm. So that, again, violence or harm is so subjective.
Yeah, and it's very subjective, like out of the words, that, for example, I mean, we have a big example of like January 6th, right? The insurrection experience with Donald Trump tweeting, let's go to the Capitol. And then everybody's saying, oh, he's starting an insurrection. It's a call to violence. And he's trying to overthrow the government. So it's like to make those additional steps from the tweet is a pretty big jump. Like you really have to like, I almost imagine there's some masterminds coming together and say, okay, how do we take this into? So that is the downside, I think, of this, idea of censorship and this juxtaposition with free speech is like, yeah, of course, we don't want free speech to promote or be like a call to violence or be something that can hurt. But at the same time, it's so easy to take something out of context. I bet like even in our conversation, if somebody were like to snippet something, maybe that I said already, like, oh, fatty, fat. Oh, yeah, this is like they're promoting hatred against, overweight people. No, we're not. Right. But it's like, it's so easy. And then it spins off into an entire world, an entire like structure. And then people rally with it. Yeah, I mean, this is I think that negative spiral where it's like, yeah, people, I guess, proponents of free speech are really like, how can we how can this be possible? And how do we, I guess this is our question too, is like, how do we come into balance when we know that there is this ego that human beings have that will take whatever is possible, tools like free speech, tools like censorship, and use it for very personal ends, not for pro bono, not for the good of all,
I think it all has to come down to power, right? Just like everybody's own want. To check out our episode on sex, money, and power, which is, we talk about a lot about why we seek such unconscious forms of power, for control, essentially. Yeah. And when you censor one viewpoint, you're essentially manipulating a narrative to fit your viewpoint. You're essentially canceling out 50% of it so that you can direct a certain narrative a certain way. And that makes sense when you look at traditional media, right? Their goal is to basically amplify like hate and show you problems.
Yeah, which is interesting. Shouldn't that be censored?
Yeah,
like,
not harmful.
It's harmful and it's violent. But like, if we literally like, take a look at the news and have this like thermometer for like, is this like heart opening and, and in empowering people, helping them to think better, helping them to like make sense of this in a way that promotes peace? Absolutely not. It's completely biased. It's completely sensationalized in a way that it's like, it's polarizing in a very, very obvious way. And the different news networks polarize it in their direction for their particular audience. So what are we left with? We're left with like exactly the thing that we're trying to say, like that freedom of speech doesn't cover, is the fact that we are being manipulated and allowing this manipulation. And then that same manipulation comes in and says, no, this one is not allowed.
I think one of the downsides too is like, or many downsides to censorship. One is that you prevent people from being able to think freely for themselves. So you stop like critical thinking, right? It's like when somebody grows up and they have no idea of opposite viewpoints, they are literally conditioned to not be able to think critically. You stop the ability to like self-reflect and all that stuff too.
Imagine that the antidote offered, against these viewpoints is critical thinking. Like that, like, as a news article comes out, maybe there's this reminder. It's like, hey, remember your critical thinking. And maybe like every day before the news starts, maybe at like certain times in the day, it's like showing you how to discern whether something's true or whether it's biased or what to do with your emotion, right? And where it's actually coming from. Like a 10-minute segment played like, throughout the day would like, it would be like, hey, this is our position, is we stand for truth. We stand for the ability, of our planet and humanity to self-actualize, to become lucid and clear instead of being always told. But you will never see this, because this is the thing, is that like that proponent of censorship is the very one that is actually doing all of the manipulation. And that is, where that circle comes in. It's almost like yeah, it's almost like there's this puppet master and it's playing these different puppets and it's making us think certain ways, but it's got its hands up both asses, right? And it's like, yeah, it's that play. It's almost as if, this idea of censorship, for it to be truly in service, it would need to be done by an enlightened council, right? It's like by a kind of a neutral, highly refined consciousness, whether we say, okay, maybe we put it into the AI realm, but AI is also programmed again. So who's going to program it? It's like, yeah, I always think about, in certain movies of the future where they have this grand vision, there's always, not always, but there's this theme of like having the wise ones, somebody who is like removed a little bit from society, but at the same time has great wealth of experience, and they kind of like share their outcomes, right? And they share to the king what needs to be done, and this king is there to serve the council. So in our case, we don't have any like obvious council. We don't have any council where the people are like, yes, yeah, I would love, for you to lead us because we know that you have our highest interest in mind. I can't imagine that anybody at this day really thinks that any political leader or any necessarily even like corporate leader has the best interests of the public in mind.
Definitely not politics. When you look at political debates, such a joke, like, right? But we do have those. And I think you were touching in on one of the solutions earlier, which is brilliant. Like, imagine if mainstream news did have that warning. But another solution is podcasters, like the things that we're doing right now, the ability to hold a podcast on your own and get it out to millions of people, something like a Joe Rogan or a Russell Brand or something like that. Somebody who you could, the audience has already, millions of people have already seen that they're empathetic to multiple viewpoints, and the ability for them to bring on leaders in certain disciplines and have healthy debates. I think podcasts is one of the most amazing ways that we can keep critical thinking going. And one thing that I heard was, typically people are afraid of censorship, but it's not really censorship they're afraid of control and power and literally their life. So that was typically in the form of military or police control or whatever. You say something wrong, well, you're going to go to jail, or you're going to get something bad happen to you, or they're going to kill you in certain countries, right? Yeah. I heard that the power of social media might in a couple of years, if it hasn't already, be more powerful than the power of the gun, which is saying something very big, right? So even if they are going to kill you, at least I can get my message out to millions of people before that happens and help shift humanity in some way, shape, or form. So
Yeah, it's incredible to think, just a few decades ago, right? We had the likes of Hitler and Stalin, and like literally you could not say something that went against the government view. And if we did, somebody who is got the good or boy or girl syndrome, they would be like, oh my God, I'm gonna report him, right? And then you literally lose your life or your livelihood, or the family loses one of the parents, and sometimes even the children would be conditioned into reporting on their parents, and they don't know what they're doing, but they're like, oh yeah, mom said something against the Hitler, and then she loses her mom, right? And it's like it's incredible the depths to which it can go. And I imagine, like, again, like, I don't know what's happening in North Korea, I don't really know what's happening in China, but there's also, this kind of like vibration, at least I kind of feel it in the collective, like, yeah, like, holy crap, it's like a prison, it's like a social experiment, in the sense of like, we don't know of that level of control, but there are people completely living out their lives in the midst of this kind of like, in the Soviet, they used to call it the Iron Curtain, which is basically this like censorship that only what we say, is true, and don't go outside of this curtain.
yeah, I feel like those countries, and again, I'm just speaking on what I feel. I don't know if this is true. Is like mostly based on fear. But as I was thinking that, like the collective of fearing authority, I was like, is that true? Or are a lot of people also looking at the collective authority, the people that can control and censor people, as a safety mechanism, right? So you have this balance of like fear versus safety. And when you look at all of mainstream narratives, they basically take the guys, whenever they mention it's for your safety or it's for your protection, and this is why we're doing certain things, this is why we're censoring people. It's like, oh, for my safety and for my protection. Okay, that makes sense. I'm safer and more protected. So I can see why people would prefer an outsourced form of control to be able to censor people.
I guess that really would depend on the level of, again, consciousness and the level of like development of the person. Because if we think about like in our child self, of course, we don't want any responsibility. We want to make sure that we're being good, and we want somebody to tell us what good is, but there comes a level of maturity, right? And this is the thing that's not really allotted for. It's like, is that level at which, yeah, we have to actually learn critical thinking. We have to actually learn to discern. We have to learn to also, like, we as a collective to say, oh no, that's not true. And be able to present a side of the argument. But that's not, there is not really actually a forum for that necessarily, where we can have more of that, unless, in these silos of, yeah, like somebody who has a large following with a podcast. Yeah, they have, but think about how much sway they have really compared to the unison of media, where, they're literally on all the radios, all of the televisions. Yeah, there's this sentiment now that, like, yeah, people are trusting it less, pulling it away from it, but it's still a monolith compared to any one podcast, right?
Mm-hmm. And I know me and you probably share a similar view of like, whenever there's darkness, the good always pulsates back into place. So the good will always arise. And we had talked about some ideas around how we can potentially circumvent censorship, which I think we're more leaning towards that it's not the right thing in majority of cases where it's used. And again, we'll go through some examples later on. But even like people that are high up that people might think are like politically slanted or monetarily slanted to censor things, guys like Jack Dorsey, the owner of Twitter, right? Twitter is like literally the world's forum for chatter and debate and stuff like that. He was, I believe, on Joe Rogan, and he was even talking about yeah, maybe there should be one version of Twitter where it's the Wild West, where everything goes, and then one version where it's censored, and people can make the choice, like, where do they want to go. Now that makes sense, because guys like Andrew Tate, who were banned, move over to Rumble, and now Rumble's stock goes up, Twitter or everybody else's stock goes down. So I feel like naturally all of this is arising for the sake of something better to come from it.
Yeah, it's always like this, right? Like, and it reminds me of this, like, I guess it's like a Zen teaching story, um where I feel like it just encapsulates this concept that we whenever we judge that something is right or wrong or good or bad, right? It's a story of a farmer who had a son and they had some horses, and one day these horses run away. The gate left open, the horses ran away. The neighbor comes to them and says, well, it's so unfortunate that your horses all ran away. And the wise man, he's like, yes, maybe, maybe yes, maybe no, we'll see. Then the next day, the horses come back and they brought wild horses with them.
Nice.
And these wild horses, and now it's like he's got more horses. And then the neighbor comes again. It's like, oh, it's so fortunate. It's so fortunate that you have these wild horses. It's like, maybe yes, maybe no. Then his son gets on to try to tame one of these horses. The horse kicks him and the son breaks his leg in his fall. The neighbor comes again, is like, oh, this is so unfortunate. This is very unfortunate, very bad. And the guy's like, maybe yes, maybe no. And then the next day, the army comes through to conscript all the young men. And because this one is broken leg, he doesn't get to go to the army. And so we always, I really believe that actually the only frequency that is actually pulsating through life is love, is truth, is good, all good without an opposite. And we just have this limited perspective on it. And so I am so with you on that. I feel like even if there's the most dark, ignorant censorship, it will be the birthplace of the most like free, enlightened kind of way of us communicating.
Yeah, and all we see is like a series of unfortunate events. Let's maybe go through some examples, and I'd love to see your takes on these certain subjects, and then we can discuss like, is it harmful? What is the harm? Things like that, if anything comes up. So let's freestyle this. So the first one I wrote down was believing in a flat earth. So is this something that should be censored? What are some potential harmful things that could happen?
Interesting. Yeah, I actually believe that the flat earth is like a psyops that probably started by the CIA.
Oh man, don't mention them. I wrote down, anytime you mention the CIA, your videos are like shut down. We'll bleep that out.
Bleep.
Because CIA has a partnership with YouTube.
Yeah, that's probably have partnerships with everybody by saying, hey, we'll kill you if you don't do what we say. Yeah, I would say that, flat earth, not flat earth, it's not really a big thing that is going to lead to violence or harm, whether people think that they live under a dome of firmament and that the earth is flat and we're surrounded by the circle of ice. It's the exact same experience as if you believe that the circle of ice is actually on the top and you have a round earth and your earth lives here. So, apart from, pointing out of the two sides of the faults of the other, to me it sounds like a very harmless kind of debate.
But what if people start going to this end of the world and falling off, man?
Well, then we'll know that it's flat.
No, I agree with you. That's why I started with that one. That one's pretty easy to see that it's not that harmful. So I don't think that type of content is censored anyways. Maybe it is in certain platforms, but how about smoking cigarettes? We used to have these commercials where cigarettes were just on TV all the time in ads. And it was like, even now it's like we market, it's like may cause lung cancer and all these horrible things. Like, do you think that should be censored? Because it definitely wasn't, I don't think.
And now we have commercials that talk about the dangers of smoking, right? That, I remember commercials with like people with like holes in their throat, right? And they're taking a smoke through the hole, isn't
that harmful though?
It's harmful, but they're saying
not only harmful, they're admitting that it's harmful.
Yeah, and they're saying, don't do this. But again, like, yeah, so these are lifestyle choices. I would also put in there like alcohol. I would put in there fast food, but we don't see fast food and alcohol necessarily censored. So it's very interesting. Like, I think that some of these things are I don't know what the specific word for it is. It's kind of like a distraction or a decoy. It's like there's a major issue happening. And what people do is like they focus on the small one and say, this is the major issue. We're gonna censor it. And I feel like that's kind of like what smoking really is. It's like the real problem is addiction, and the core of addiction, in our society, whether it's to smoking, alcohol, sex, drugs, entertainment, whatever it is. But there's nobody who's ever in business is going to talk about, hey, we need to really put out a campaign, to awaken from addiction, because addiction is the very nature of commerce, right? It's like recurring payments, recurring customers. We do it, like there's all of this kind of sticky psychology about how to bring people to continue, and not even sticky psychology, even like chemically, right? Like we know some of the companies use things like MSG, which is basically like it's a neurotoxin, but it's like an addictive, good tasting one. So, and even sugar, like the entire sugar industry, we don't need sugar right now. There are literally like tens of different substitutes for the traditional sugar cane that are like so much healthier, don't cause blood sugar spikes, won't cause diabetes. They're never used anywhere, except you buy them, in the health food store.
Yeah, so many examples of like causing harm to people that are not censored. And now we're focused on things like, is this person a misogynist? Is this like other things that don't really have a direct correlation to your well-being? You know what I mean? Let's go through a couple more. So this one can seem quite relevant. So say you said something online and somebody doesn't agree with you and they dox your address. This is a very common one. They like give out your address. Do you think stuff like that should be censored? So is there potential for harm or something like that? Because again, when we're talking freedom of speech, everybody should really be able to say what they say. If they know where you live, they should be able to call it out, right? So does that go against censorship?
Yeah, it's very interesting, of course, like, let's say that somebody says, I don't vaccinate, and somebody who's like really, big and prominent figure. And then, the anti-vaxxers are like, hey, I know where, I don't know, whatever Elon lives, or like, whoever, and post the address, and like, let's go like burn and trash this thing down. Yeah, I think that would work. I think the mob mentality would click in and they would actually do something violent.
It's like Pizzagate. You remember that one? Pizzagate, where there's like conspiracy theories, and then they ended up shooting up the store.
Yes. Yeah. Pizzagate is that cosmic pizza, right? Yeah. So that's literally somebody taking the law into their own hands. That's not necessarily like the mob mentality. That's more like a vigilante kind of complex. The mob mentality is probably more relevant to the conversation of censorship and freedom of speech, because like it's not these individuals, whether you censor them or not, are going to go and shoot up the school or do whatever they want to do. But the mobs are so much like so emotionally manipulated, so that I think it's easy. So, would it be good? Yeah, I think it would be great for that person who's about to get their house trashed to, have that censored. But like, how do you censor something like this? You just censor addresses as a whole, or like, like what is it? Another question is like, what is it that is actually the source of this problem? Is it the fact that this person said, I don't vaccinate and I don't agree with this? Or is the problem the fact that we have some kind of freaking like, boiling pot of society where people are ready to pop off because somebody chooses a different way than they go? Like, that seems to be the real problem, and not necessarily, whether we censor this or address or not.
Mm-hmm. I think we've gone through enough. I was going to talk about vaccines, but I think that is, you guys can see why these subjects are so like subjective, and why it requires not only one person who thinks they know the answer to this, even though you're like, yeah, that makes 100%. We should censor people's addresses because the ill intent is there. Why else would they put out an address unless it's for physical harm? But like, it's almost like you need, like you said, a council or a group that's voted on. And I mean, I guess that's what politics is, but everybody's seeing through the veil of that too. So let's so just one other thing I wanted to mention, because I just heard this actually on a Andrew Tate just released another podcast with Patrick David Bett, off of valuetainment is very good so far. But he said basically when YouTube blocked him, literally guess all the other companies that blocked him. I'll just go through some of them. Skype, Discord, Stripe, all his banks. He listed like all of them. They shut down all his accounts. Uber, Airbnb, and this happened one after the other. So somewhere there's somebody who pushes a button and says, no, shut this person out from society. And literally every big tech company complies.
What was his thing? What did he say? What was the thing?
Everything, like vaccines, how they're all fake. Like he was talking about just like empowering men in a way, like don't be fucking lazy. I think we covered some of his short clips. But again, those short clips is what he's saying. It's like what you were saying earlier. Long form content gets cut up into short clips and then misunderstood in terms of the context. So yeah, no warning for him at all. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But what else can we talk about here? How about we talk about forgiveness? Now, a lot of the platforms, once they ban you, it's a permanent ban for life. Do you think that is a good thing, or do you think that people change moment to moment? Like, they be given a temporary timeout? I personally think that permanent bans should be illegal. Just like we forgive prisoners and they're out walking and they've murdered people, right?
Yeah. Well, I think this kind of comes to the question of like the ownership of the platform, right? Is it like, so if you and I have like this podcast, right? And like somebody's on here as a guest and they're like, they're saying something that we're like, you know what? It's time to mute them. And we like, this is, and we ban them and they're not going to be on this podcast anymore.
Delete NPC.
Right. That is just like a private forum. Yeah. And yeah, whatever we want to do on here or not do is totally up to us. Now we have these companies like Twitter, Quora, Facebook, and they are an interesting kind of entity in terms of business. They are not considered necessarily a public service, like a government service, but they are also not necessarily like a totally private company, right? There is something there where I don't remember. I looked into this in the past, but they have a particular status where they are posed as a non-editorial forum. And for this, they have certain tax privileges. They have certain bypasses from the government and all kinds of different things, because essentially they're saying, yeah, it's a private company, but anybody can, create their own profile. They can do anything that they want, to post whatever they want. And we are not editors. So this is different than a magazine. So like if we can keep submitting things to the magazine, but they're like, we're banned from it, and they don't publish it. Okay. You can't really make a big argument for that. But in the case where you as a company, and I don't remember again the name of this particular designation, when you are represented as a non-editorial forum, and then you start editing, then you are actually in breach of your status. Mm-hmm. And then you need to go back to being, let's say, a completely private company, being taxed in a different way, being seen in a different way within the government sphere, or whatever it is, within the business sphere, corporation law, etc. So that is, I think, one point of the issue that's not really discussed so much. But if you and I wanted to start a forum and people join at this link, and then as soon as they join, we ban them, we can do that, right? And that's no big deal. It's just about really, and like, for example, Google, it's like, it's not presented as, we filter your information so that when you search us, you will see exactly what we think is the best. We curated the best. We censored the things that we don't like. It's not presented this way. And many things are not presented as they are. Similar, again, to the social media. If they had this kind of disclaimer, oh, this is what we do. What you are experiencing here is the opinion of our editors, not the opinion of the public or any other particular opinion. Well, wonderful. That's what is true then. And if I want to participate, then I do. But if I participate in a platform that is supposedly like free to express whatever, but I find out that it's actually not whatever, it is actually a very siloed, specific view that's being fed to me. This is the concern, I think, that the the freedom of speech kind of side was raising. Is like, wait a second, it's a misrepresentation of what this actually is.
Yeah, it's a fine line, because you see this happen, like you said, at the micro scale where it's just me and you talking and we have a third person. Now we have the right to kind of censor them or kick them off, all the way to the macro scale of like global tech platforms. Now there's also in betweens. It's like, let's say this is just one example. Like I saw recently, it was like this vegan festival and everybody was having a great time. And then this meat eater comes with like raw liver or something like that. And now he's like in the middle of this festival. It's not a small scale. It's not a super large scale. Do they have the right to prevent his freedom of speech of being like, oh, vegans are bad, like meat is great? You know what I mean? So it's happening from the micro to the macro. It's freedom. This whole freedom of speech thing is very interesting. And again, it's country specific, right? Not every country has this such leeway to be able to say what they want.
Let's think to our tribal days, you know, like if we think about tribal consciousness, there's absolutely censorship, right? It's not that anybody does whatever they want in the tribe. And this to me makes some sense. It just seems to me like, yeah, there's just different tribes. There's tribes who want to experience this kind of a reality and have this conversation about eating raw liver. And then there's the vegans who are like, don't kill the animals. But the vegans are not going to kill these guys, right? And these guys shouldn't necessarily want to kill the vegans. They can just have their own tribes with their own culture, their own rules. And to me, this makes sense. It's like, you know, why can't we have like these different organizations or these different ways that naturally consciousness aggregates and organizes itself into groups that within their own group, they love what they do. They appreciate this kind of thing. Oh, you don't like it here? Go to the vegan group over there, you know? But like, we don't have this kind of a space. Instead, it's like we're trying to like cater to everybody, which is impossible. And we're trying to protect people sometimes from hearing from their own leaders, right? And it's like, or their own, like, you know, whatever, like we may say their gurus or their own tribe, they're censored from hearing that because somebody here thinks that it's like, it's not okay for all the others to hear, but what they want to hear, why can't they hear what they want to hear?
Yeah, it all literally comes down to like control at the end of the day, force and power. And yeah, the fear is death. Again, everything relates back to death. What would you say to somebody who believes strongly in censorship of anything anti-mainstream? So anti-vaccines, whatever, misogynists.
Yeah. I mean, what I could say is just like, good for you. But in the sense of like, just think about you being, yeah, really, just think about you being on the other side. Like the only thing that I can really highlight in this moment is like empathy, compassion, and like walking in the other person's shoes, right? In the other person's moccasins. So this idea is like, okay, so great. So you don't want to hear this, but imagine that you had a child that was vaccinated and died. Okay. The only cause of death that anybody can find is like this vaccine. And you want to say to your neighbors, say, hey, wait a second, there's some fucking potential danger. You need to consider this. And for saying that, you go to jail. Like, how do you position that? How do you think about that? Because people are sharing their real experience. Yeah, certainly we can say, yeah, maybe there's these goofs that are just sort of like, oh, you know, just throwing things. But like, really, I don't know. I feel like most of this really comes from, if you watch any vaccine documentary, like there is some really freaking like solid evidence to have a debate about. Not to necessarily say, oh, yeah, we're going to be ending with all vaccines, but to have a conversation, right? But instead, there's no conversation because it's a threat to others. Meanwhile, this one, and again, coming back to this example, it's like you're feeling, oh my God, I got threatened, not only threatened, I experienced loss. Because of this, I need to prevent others from this threat, right? So like, that's what I would say. And I would say, consider that, you know, and if they have some emotional intelligence, they would be able to feel like, yeah, that really sucks, but they may still have, you know, their opinion.
I think that all humans have some level of emotional intelligence. I almost feel like if you take any human being and you feed them one narrative and you ask them like, how do you feel? Do you agree or disagree? They'd be like, okay, I guess since it's the only narrative I know, sure, I agree. But then you feed them, let's say, a podcast which has both sides, and now you're having a leader on one side argue and a leader on the other side. I feel like if you ask that same person, how do you feel about this now, they would feel much stronger in their opinion because they have the free will to decide. So if you guys want to see Boris and I start a channel called the Non-Dual Duel, where we bring on leaders and try to have healthy discussions, that'd be interesting. Comment below.
Yeah.
And it takes skill too, right? To just be able to sit unbiasedly and allow both people to share and have, again, hold that empathy. So I think, yeah.
This is the thing, is like, we have to also understand that bias is an inherent aspect of the ego. Like, you are going to be biased towards your experience, because otherwise, why are you living your experience? You know, like if you're a vegan, vegetarian, if you are, you know, working out this many times a day, if you're meditating, like I am biased towards it because I look at it and I see, I'm like, oh, my life is great. I'm doing this. I would love to share this with you. And if somebody says, oh, you know, meditation is a hoax, I'd be like, okay, you know, but it's like, I'm very clearly biased. I would hear their opinion. I'm like, but to me, it would be very hard to really take it in and be like, this must be like satire. This must be like, you know, just a joke. So I think that considering the fact that we are, you know, we are a very young consciousness, with biases, with egos, with the desire to control, with the desire to be right. It's like, to consider this and then consider the conversations that come from human beings, I would just say take it all with a grain of salt and just be like, well, you know what? Interesting. It's like, that's an interesting opinion. That's an interesting opinion. I have my own, you know, to a greater degree, I almost feel like it's as if we are still at the level where we live our own personal dream, our own personal reality. Yeah, there is overlap. There's like some overlap, and you and I, you know, we have some correlations, and there's a great human kind of overlap in many small ways. We know what it's like to love, to lose, to have sex, to eat food, to be sick, to, you know, all of these are common, but our world is so individual. So it's almost like, you know, I feel like the true path forward is to really to work with the person in an individual level, to empower their world, empower their capacity to love, to forgive, to see a vision, to have a sense of, like, you know, well-being and direction and a love for truth. You know, all of these are not going to come through censorship, and they're not going to come, you know, by somebody forcing something on you, but they can come through like an invitation of like, hey, here's a conversation that we're having. So it's interesting. You know, I think that there is this grassroots movement that's been in place probably for many decades already, that it is from the bottom up, it is building this way. Certainly, like, you know, you and I are in these circles of spiritual development, personal development. I see it everywhere in all of my friends. Everybody's leveling up, everybody is growing, but the top down seems to be actually the opposite. It's this dumbing down effect, it's this control, it's this like, you don't know, we'll tell you. And so we kind of have this dichotomy between, you know, the bottom up and the top down, which is incongruent.
Yeah, and I don't think there's like, am I lagging? Yeah, I don't think there's one solution to this. Again, this has been happening since the beginning of like humanity. Like even way back, I think I heard Socrates. He was one that was like leading the way, going against the mainstream narrative. He eventually killed himself, I think. But yeah, and I don't think. Okay, yeah, I don't think there's a one solution. I think it's a dynamic, evolving thing. Now, I don't also think that if you ask any person in the world whether censorship in general is the right solution, I don't think anybody would say yes, no matter how strong their viewpoint is, right? And if they did say yes, if you found this rare human who was like, yes, censorship is the way to go, you would be able to ask them, like, yeah, if I snapped your finger, if I could play God and snap your finger, and now everybody in the world has the same viewpoints, would you snap your finger? I don't think that person would. And if they said yes, then most people look at that person and be like, you're an idiot. Like a world of one viewpoint. It's kind of stupid. No, okay, maybe two viewpoints. right? Three,
Mhm.
four, where does it stop? No, you would want the world to have infinite viewpoints.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right on point. Um I really feel like looking outside, and this kind of even brings me back to these images of like burning, right? Book burning, witch burning, and witch hunts. It's like, oh, this person is of a different opinion. Burn her. Like, what? Why? What? Like, how? In what level does that make sense? And the only level it makes sense in is fear, right? It's like, oh, I don't understand this. We need to get rid of it. Need to kill it. I mean, that's how Jesus got killed. Also, it's like, oh, no, I don't understand this. let's murder him. Um, but this is just a very it reminds me also of did you read that book, The Lord of the Flies?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. That book, many of us, I think, growing up read it as part of our high school curriculum. It's talking about how children, well-behaved, nice, normal children, are on an island, and they crash land on an island or something like this. There's no adults anymore. They're killed or whatever. And so the children over time turn into savages. They turn into this like really cruel, ruling like elite and subjects, and things that they don't like, they kill, or they extricate. And that's like, again, that deep tribal consciousness. So I think we have these influences towards devolution and evolution, and many of us like fall on somewhere on the scale. And so it's so hard to have a blanket statement for everybody.
I think when you were speaking, I was like, it feels like everybody kind of wants to be a leader in some way, shape, or form. If there's no person in leadership, or even if there is a person in leadership and your ego disagrees with that person in leadership, you will naturally want to be the leader, right? And in that process of being the leader, you must take a stance, right? Otherwise, you're not a leader. And so
Yeah.
with that stance, naturally, there's a oppression of another viewpoint, right? You're
Yeah.
leading something. So it's interesting.
Thought leadership, right? There's this whole realm. It's called thought leader. And this is you essentially being a leader of an idea, of a movement, right? Martin Luther King, Gandhi, like these are examples of like mass movements that are not necessarily supported by just one person, but they're spearheaded by this icon, right? And yeah, I mean, essentially, we may deduce that they have an anti motive, in the sense like Martin Luther King was anti-slavery, if we want to project that on him. But I don't know if it's within human beings that are at this level, that if it really feels that way, or if it's just like they see the promised land, so to speak, which is, just to clarify, it's a real thing. It's like the awareness of oneness, awareness of perfect oneness will preclude any kind of violence, any kind of slavery, any kind of, so they are in essence standing for something that's true, but within the dream, the people cannot see it's true. And so they're not necessarily anti, they're just like, no, the truth is this, we are truly one. I have a dream that we stand together, you know? So I think, we can project an anti point on them and an exclusion of a viewpoint, but it's really like, I do feel in my sense of wherever I'm presently at, that there is an absolute truth, and that absolute truth is not a conceptual ideology or something like that. It is love. It is the realization of oneness. And so whatever is in service of that is good and should be supported. And whatever says that this is not true, that only separation and loneliness and hate and war is true, and then I'll say, okay, well, this is the Antichrist conversation, the Matrix broadcast.
Mm-hmm. Nice. We've been going quite a while. I would just maybe want to end on this is like, yeah, truth, I think is found in healthy discord. I just say that. And with multiple viewpoints. I think, again, seeing the beauty of difference is something that everybody should start doing. And I'm just super grateful for the internet and the ability to connect with thousands of or millions of people instantly. Because if we did not have this, could you imagine, like, would Hitler be able to do what he did with the internet? I doubt it. He would be instantly shut down, instantly, like, people would riot against him. So I do like this kind of there's been pros and cons to the internet, and I think we're all working through the growing pains of trying to figure out how to censor people. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, certainly growing pains of like this increased connectivity. If you really think about it, the internet is representing a principle in consciousness and the principle of oneness and instant communication or omniscience, right? Being or omnipresence, being in multiple places, being everywhere at the same time. It's not that it is that, it's approximating that. It is its current version of the manifestation of the truth. And so, yeah, we are like, oh my God, like I'm losing privacy. There's no real privacy in oneness, and there's no need for it. But as we are experiencing this like more exposure, and it's like, oh my God, stop this, stop that, stop, and I think it's part of us waking up and growing up, and these are the growing pains. I very much agree with you.
Beautiful. Let's add privacy to a topic that we talk about. I think that's a very interesting one.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Very relevant. I'm sure it's not going to be the last conversation around this topic. So make sure you guys like and subscribe. Any last words, Boris?
Yeah, drop your comments. I'm very curious about, what you feel is, true and right censorship and what is inappropriate. It's it's a very like juicy way, I think, that we can kind of like begin to, as a society, try to understand like what can we do, and should there be boundaries on censorship, or should censorship be unbounded, and yeah, so I'd love for you to participate in our discussion. Drop that comment below, hit like if you enjoyed this, subscribe, and let's continue our journey together.
Beautiful. Thank you, Boris. Thank you, audience. God bless. Take care. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Oh.